Hi, I'm Laura, this is Andrew, and today we have Gerardo here to talk to us.
But before we start this podcast, Laura, we have a very important question to ask.
Are tax people boring?
I don't think so. I think it's actually fascinating if you think about it, because every interaction between the public sector and the population, in this case, the taxpayers, generates a vast amount of information. And that information is useful to provide better services, to provide or to have a better understanding of what are the people's needs.
What's a skill that you haven't learned but you would like to have learned?
I always wanted to be a blacksmith. I find it fascinating. As a hobby, I work a lot with wood. I don't qualify myself as a carpenter, but I like carpentry. But one thing that I would love to learn about is the tools and obviously what a blacksmith does. So that'll be interesting.
That's cool. I think it's one of those skills as well that almost like a dying art, right? So many things are just manufactured rather than handcrafted. So
yeah, I think it's a fascinating way of if earning life with or enjoying doing those things, I would do it definitely.
Is there one thing that you do every day that keeps you grounded?
Yeah, I think knowing that I don't know everything and that everything changes. The thing that I learned yesterday might not be necessarily valid tomorrow. And the fact that there are new trends, new things coming out, and the area that we are working now, the technology, digitalization is an area where, whatever you learn, right now it's probably irrelevant or outdated in probably within a year or two. So really knowing that you still have a lot to learn keeps you actually entertained, but also keeps you grounded in the sense that there's more to do and more work that you need to do.
So it's almost like knowing that you don't know. It's just, as you say, that information that you knew yesterday could be changed or irrelevant today, and you have to keep that open mind. You have to keep on learning.
Yeah, you have to keep up to date because again, things change so fast, and all your knowledge serves as a baseline, but by no means is something that you know by heart and you can anticipate. So is actually that traveling and visiting countries and talking to my counterparts that keeps you up to date and get to understand the needs and how you're able to close that gap.
I think that's doing from it. Good for you, Andrew, to remember that.
Yeah, thank you.
That you don't know everything.
I know pretty much everything.
What's the best piece of career advice you've been given?
Part is that not be so cocky or arrogant, say I know everything. There's always someone out there who probably knows more than you, and that you need to understand and be open to different angles and different opinions in different situations. So obviously you need to listen to what people has to say and again the different opinions, the different angles, because they're coming from different realities than yours, and is as valid that reality as the one that you're living in. So I guess the best piece of advice is actually, again, knowing that you don't know everything and be open to understand other people's perspectives, realities.
That's really good answer. Gerardo, would you rather travel to the future or to the past, and why?
That's a tough one. I would say a little bit of both. I would travel to the past just to understand better where are we coming from. Sometimes you need to revisit the things that you've done or the things that people has done over time to understand where you're coming from and what future entails. But also traveling into the future would be fascinating just to understand and see probably if you have work in a particular project, seeing it over time and making sure that it goes into a good port, a good end. That also would be nice to know.
So what's your biggest tax ick?
Bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy is my biggest tax ick just because I know that in today's world, you can significantly reduce time, be more effective, um, and more transparent, um, and you can achieve more with the use of technology. So I guess bureaucracy, red tape, and the fact that we're still not much into where things should be in tax administration and tax policy as well. It's not only tax administration, but tax policy as well. I guess that's kind of what frustrates me a little bit.
Yeah,
especially with Brazil.
I think that's a great answer. I think you particularly see different countries how they operate, and you can also see what can be achieved and what isn't being achieved because of someone else's agenda. But I think potentially that also comes into where you've mentioned before about your best piece of advice, which was about being able to listen and understand to what other people's perspective is and where they're coming from. Because I know certainly with sort of like tax legislation or policy, I've in the past have been very frustrated to sort of try and work out why certain things are done, and then you understand actually there's other laws like privacy laws or ethics. You go, oh, okay, yeah, they do need to be considered. So you're not thinking about those because that's not your world. But then when you start going into something, you actually find out maybe the reasons aren't always as straightforward as you necessarily thought. But at the same time, quite a lot of those reasons are restrictive for the wrong way. So I completely agree with your approach that bureaucracy is definitely a tax ick.
Yeah, and probably maybe 200 years ago, the laws were written in a way that it made sense. But as you evolve and those reforms taking place, if they didn't go in hand with the reality, and reality being technology and reality being actually mechanisms, tools, and processes that nowadays do things in a much faster, more efficient manner. I think the fact that there's still this lag in terms of legislation, in terms of procedures, it actually makes it hard to believe that we're going to accomplish things in a much faster way.
Yeah, I think technology moves at a lot faster pace than people.
Yeah.
In your opinion, the biggest challenge in tax technology in the sort of the last sort of like 5-10 years?
I think the biggest challenge depends by region, but the biggest challenge and the biggest change, at least for the Latin American region, I would say it's the electronic invoice by far, just because of the impact both at the micro and macro level, and in terms of how everything kind of accelerated, in just a matter of I would say 10, 20 years. So electronic invoice is one tool in tax administration that has accelerated many things. But also, if I would say, what accelerated the use of technology for many tax administrations, I would say around the world, believe it or not, was COVID. COVID actually accelerated in a fascinating way all the tools and all the projects that were actually left in the back of a shelf actually kind of accelerated things just because all of a sudden we were faced by a different reality, right? And it was disruptive in a sense. People could not go physically to the tax administration, so tax administration have to actually kind of come up with sort of different things to actually make business keep going and tax collection happening. So the fact that there are kind of definite individual projects or things happening at any given moment in time, and that changes the entire way that we work in so little time. Like COVID, it actually took maybe a year or so. It's fascinating. So those two, I mean, there are other obviously, but I would say for Latin America, the electronic invoicing for sure, and then more globally, the fact that COVID hit and had to tax administration had to rethink what was going on.
If you could predict another major change in the next 10 years for tax compliance, what do you think it would be?
Or maybe even further out than 10 years, because obviously how slow things work from a sort of a bureaucracy and legal point of view.
So the way that I picture most tax administrations in the future, they're actually, I'm thinking about, they're completely digitalized. They're automated, right, for many instances. So I would envision actually tax administrations like a public company where you like electricity, right, or water, that you pretty much, they send you an invoice, they tell you, look, this is how much you consume, which in the tax administration would be, this is how much you earn, this is how much this are your revenues, these are your expenditures, this is what pretty much you owe us at the end of the day based on your fiscal on a fiscal year. So I in a way I foresee tax administrations behaving in a way that any utility company actually does, that they send you kind of an invoice every month or every 3 months or every year. So in that sense, I think that arrears, for example, tax arrears, are not possible in a future tax administration, because you would be able to reconciliate both things at the same time. So, and then you would have obviously exchange of information with other institutions like the financial institutions, but other sectors as well, that could help you get the information and establishing a relationship with a taxpayer, a trust relationship with the taxpayer, in a way that, again, taxes would be paid no different than a utility company. That's what I think what a tax administration eventually could become. Now, obviously, this is not going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, but as you're saying, maybe 10, 20 years, where technology is so advanced that it will allow for that.
I think it does require better structure and those government sort of departments working more closely together. I recently spoke with the Taiwanese FAI team, and that's a sort of a department that's been set up to manage the data pretty much across all government sort of areas. So therefore, rather than everybody working independently, this one team determines how to structure, how to bring the data. So standardization is built in from the start, and as a result, from speaking to the guys, they're able to use the data in a much better way, quicker, and with more confidence as well. So I think what you're saying there about having a tax authority that has all of the information, they ultimately present you a bill, it's going to take a while, but I think there are several tax authorities doing the right things to get to that point.
And again, you still have the option to contest the results or that invoice, if you call it invoice instead of a tax form. But that doesn't mean that you could actually follow the entire process automatically. And then obviously, if you contest that result, then obviously you would have someone explaining you.
Do you think developing countries, quite often they don't have the burden of big legacy tax systems, but they are in a position where they can start to introduce technology? Do you think they'll be able to potentially introduce this newer tax technology faster than traditional, say, European countries?
The advantage, if you want to call it that way, the advantage that a developing country has is they don't have to go all the way through the learning curve, right? Because there's some experiences, some lessons learned from other countries, so they can catch up faster. We have seen that specifically with the electronic invoice. Some countries, Chile, for example, Chile, Mexico, Brazil started with the electronic invoice probably 30 years ago.
Chile were the first.
Mexico, yeah, and Chile were the first ones, followed by Brazil, and then a bunch more actually followed. But of the countries, for example, Uruguay was telling us a few years ago, they said, look, I was grateful that Mexico started and Chile started, because I could actually just call them up and say, look, just what is your experience with this? How do you address this specifically topic? How do you find out what was the best mechanism? And those things obviously help developing countries that are starting, that they're not alone, and that they can actually just use some of the experience by other countries. So in that sense, I think they're able to catch up faster. It's pretty much it's more on this in the sense of, are they willing to do so? Are they willing to actually go the full the full journey, or the whole 9 yards actually, to finish and have their tax administrations fully digitalized?
And I suppose it's also that's where the bureaucracy comes in as well, or as you say, they may want to do something, but whether or not they have the resources or the structures in place to be able to even do anything, right?
We go back to the issue of bureaucracy, and something that we typically don't discuss much, but it's part of it, is the cultural change, right? Cultural change must happen because the way that tax administrations are organized in silos. These are brick and mortars and organized in silos where you have little islands of power, and nobody wants to give up on their little piece of control or power or information, right? It's hard. Technology disrupts all that. Technology doesn't work in silos. Technology is more of a matrix, right? That kind of bridges all the different units of a tax administration, and pretty much integrates everything so that everything flows much faster.
Can you explain how your role, working for a bank, how does that impact tax? What do you do as your day-to-day job, and how did you even get into tax in the first place? What got you into working for the American Development Bank?
When I started my professional career, my hometown in Mexico, I was working for the Ministry of Finance, and I was actually looking at more of a tax policy. So we would deal with many instances related to tax policy. But I realized that at some point, tax policy goes hand in hand with tax administration. In other words, tax policy does not exist without tax administration, and then obviously tax administration does not exist without tax policy. So they go hand in hand. So you have to make sure that whatever you start designing, right, as part of a tax policy, everything is being implemented accordingly to that idea. And that's where things get a little complicated when you go into tax administration and understand what are the challenges to implement those policies. So that's why I started to look into tax administration as a topic that it would also be very, very important. I kind of manage both issues, tax policy and tax administration. And I strongly believe that, again, one does not exist without the other. So when I actually start working for the bank, one of the areas that I specialized in was this issue about tax administration. And within tax administration, what are the tools available for these entities, for these agencies, to actually do and perform their work in a better manner. So we realized, as we were doing all this diagnostics, as we were talking to the directors of these agencies, we realized that there is a big gap, and there is a lack of an understanding on how things move within tax administration, right? Few people really understand what's going on within tax administration. So everybody thinks it's just collecting taxes and that's it. So it shouldn't be that difficult. But the reality is that there is this complexity in terms of how you actually work, and the units within the tax administration work all together to guarantee that the taxes are being collected. So what I do specifically in terms of my day-to-day work is trying to find ways for this entity, for tax administrations to perform better, to use the potential, the skill, the tools, and the skills too, because tax administration is not only about tools and digitalization, but it's also about people, talent, human resources. So my day-to-day is work is just to try to find ways for them to perform in a better way, and take the experiences that we know of, both within the region and outside the region, to try to give the best advice to the directors, to the units working within the tax administration, on how to perform better, and how the processes that they're actually working with can be strengthened, can be improved. And then obviously the reality is different among countries. So obviously tax administrations some of them are more advanced, some of them are not. So we have to adapt to each necessity and each country's needs.
As work for the bank, you've been there nearly 30 years, right? You've been there a really long time. Did your role, what you're doing now, did that exist when you started? Were you recruited for that role, or were you recruited for something else and then your role almost developed?
Say it developed. I would say it has developed in the sense that technology has developed as well, right? And maybe 30 years ago, under 30 years ago, we started working with famous cuts, the commercial off the shelf, right? You probably remember those. They're still obviously in the market, and there are a few companies, or I don't want to say a few companies. There are companies actually that dedicate this 30 years of business to develop technology based on the cuts. Now, it has developed, it has changed, because nowadays, for example, you still have the hybrids, you have in-house models, but then you have sort of things like the cloud, and then other types of technology that has changed the way that tax administrations actually work. We no longer are limited to either an in-house or a COTS system, but now we can actually work with different tools, hybrids, cloud, different platforms, individual platforms. So everything in a way, has changed over time. So obviously the needs have changed, and then the views that we take in the bank have changed as well.
So you've worked across multiple industries and countries. What would you say has been the most challenging tax landscape?
Whenever a reform takes place, there's always the uncertainty about what's going to happen. One of the things that actually it comes up a lot is when we're trying to change this cultural change, and engaging in technology and disruption and changes in the processes. The main concern that our clients or the tax administrations have is, okay, but just still remember that we still have to collect money, right? We're going to go into all this processes, all these changes, but we still need to guarantee that we're going to collect money for the next year or for the next few years. So obviously there's this anxiety that whenever you're engaging in changes, we don't affect collection at all while we're making all these changes. So that's probably the biggest challenge that we have when we interact with our clients.
Does it change for different countries? So, for example, in your region, you've got a country like Brazil, maybe Jamaica, and then all the way down to maybe a country like Suriname. Does the country itself really impact the challenges? And what types of challenges do you get from a country like Brazil that's a lot bigger, much more developed than a country like Suriname?
I would say, Andrew, bigger countries have bigger challenges. Brazil has a very advanced tax administration. They what is called it's called which is the revenue agency there. It's a very complex tax administration. It's efficient. It's digitalized, maybe not fully, but it's way advanced. but obviously that doesn't imply that they don't have big challenges as well, right? And they had a tax reform, a couple of years ago. So obviously, every change in a tax reform entails changes in the tax administration, as I was saying. So in that sense, obviously, they need to make sure that those changes actually are implemented at the level of tax administration. And the most, the more complex the tax administration is, obviously, um, solutions or changes require harder things to do. Other tax administrations like Suriname, for example, or Barbados are probably not as digitalized, well, are not as digitalized as Chile, Mexico, Brazil. They encounter big challenges. Those challenges, in a way, could be, I don't want to say easily, but it would be faster in a way of the solution, a faster solution. However, the institutional change and the cultural change of this tax administrations is harder. So obviously things take a longer time. Not because probably they're not as difficult as in the case of Brazil in terms of a significant change, but the fact that they operate like as they have been for the last 30, 40 years, it is hard for them to ignite in a significant change.
So it's almost like if you had a building that you already existed and you needed to bring in water and electricity, you'd have to find a way of being able to get it into an existing system. So it's challenging. Whereas if you didn't have a building at all, it's easy to bring the power and the water in because you just lay it first. But the challenge is actually then getting the building materials and actually getting someone to actually build it. So it's both very, very sort of challenging sort of situations, but for completely different reasons. And that is, in effect, what you're saying with Brazil and someone like Suriname. It's, the challenge is definitely there, but it's not for the same reason at all.
Or not, yeah, exactly. Not for the same reasons. And I mean, I get it. It happens to all of us. You're using a particular type of phone, Andrew, and then suddenly that phone is not going to be available. You need to switch to a new one with a completely different platform. So now you have to get used to it. You have to learn a new system. You have to start doing things differently from what you were doing. Same happens with a computer, with an operating system, right? It's a matter of you already have a sequence, you already have a way of doing things, and then all of a sudden I'm telling you, well, guess what? We're going to change it completely, and it's overnight. And obviously there is certain resistance, a natural resistance to the change, right? That happens.
So when it comes to the technology changes and advances, especially like AI, obviously do you think that like data privacy and ethics comes into it, and how do we ensure that it's being used for the right purpose?
Yeah, because I suppose if you've got, or an authority has a finger on the pulse of the economy to be able to identify, to subsidize gasoline or diesel for tractors, they could also potentially tell their cousin to invest in a particular company with the information they have.
It's true. I mean, but the information is going to be there anyways, technology or not. And if there are some means to actually get that information in any other way, it's going to happen. Now, obviously, technology facilitates getting that information much easier. It's true, and it has to do a lot with ethics, the way that you use information, and obviously the tax privacy between the taxpayer and the agency. However, I can tell you that even for those margins of errors, if you want to call it that way, I would take those in a heartbeat if that actually allows you to use technology for a vast number of things that could benefit the population in the near future. So in other words, what we're sacrificing because we're using technology in that sense, to me, it's smaller than what we are achieving with the use of technology.
So with that comment, I think there's a lot of tax authorities when they are looking to introduce new technology, because it requires legislation and it requires change and everything else, there tends to be a lot of tax lawyers involved. And in my experience, where tax authorities should be taking that tax first mindset to be able to say, right, we are changing things for the better. This is what we want to do. I think quite often, whether it's because those making the decision don't necessarily understand the sort of processes or below, because maybe they've only been in government a couple of years or something along these lines, or whether it's just the fear of litigation, because that's the world we live in at the moment. But how much of a sort of a hindrance, or does legislation linked to things like data privacy impact the ability to get better quality data for the tax authorities that can be then used for the greater good, as I think you've mentioned? And do you think it's something that's cultural as well, that certain countries may favor the data privacy side of things more than other countries that may be more about having the tax authority being able to maximize what they can do?
Now, I think a lot has to do with a term we use in economics called tax morale, right? But which is very much the trust that citizens and population has in their institutions, specifically in tax administration, that they will use their information for the right ways or for the right reasons. And then tax morale would be obviously how much I am inclined to pay my taxes, because I believe that paying taxes is benefiting society, and obviously it's benefiting myself, right? This is a complicated situation because really nobody wants to pay taxes, but taxes, there's this famous phrase that says taxes is what we sacrifice for, or what we pay for civilization, right? So if you don't have trust in your institutions, then obviously this thing complicates a lot, and chances are that people will not be willing to give you the information, or will restrict you a lot in using the information, or your information. The funny part is we have these restrictions on the public side, but we don't necessarily have it on the private side. I mean, you do have it, but then, for example, you download an app, and then there's this huge contract agreement that you just scroll, and it takes you maybe 30 seconds or less. Just reach the bottom and just say agree, and you don't really know what's going on with that, right? Or what you're signing for.
I read every single word every time. No, of course not.
But then obviously that's okay, but it's not okay that you use the information, right, in an anonymous way, right, where you pretty much change it, right, in a way that I'm not saying Andrew Bonnet actually earns this amount of money and then is using this type of service, but I'm saying just a type of person in the population in the UK has this characteristics, and that will help us doing this. So what I see here is that there is not the same standards applied to the private sector, where we actually sign all these things, even our phones. When you purchase a new phone, the first thing you turn it on, and then you have all this endless pages of agreements, right, that you need to sign, and then you just sign it off because what am I gonna do? So again, it happens. It's not applicable only to the public sector. It's the same goes for the private sector as well.
But then I suppose with that, and most people just literally go to the bottom and tick the box and say go ahead, because what are you supposed to do? Whereas with a lot of the tax authorities, I think they will say, well, we're not going to put this legislation in because that could impact this data privacy, because there may be a small chance that someone's home address could be used as the registration for their business, and therefore that's private, and so we can't do this at all. When you could just allow that person to opt out, or in effect say, well, if you want to be able to run a business, then this is the way it is, right?
All I'm saying is apparently we're not consistent in the way that we restrict the way that our information is used. Some of information is we willingly are surrendering. Other is just with no idea of what's going on.
Yeah, like how Facebook has been using, how it's been feeding into its AI, and a lot of their AI training has come from feeding in like people's novels. Like
Allegedly.
People get outraged by other apps tracking you and tracking all your movements and where you are and what you do. Well, your credit card does the same thing for you. If I give you $10,000 and land you in, I don't know, Florida or somewhere else, and I say to you, I'll see you within a week. When you come back, you spend the $10,000 I gave you with a card. I know exactly where you've been and exactly which restaurants you visit, where you stay at the hotel, if you rented a car, if you needed a medicine. I know exactly everything just by the credit card transaction. If I give you those $10,000 in cash, and I tell you I'll see you in a week, there's absolute no way to know where you were, what you did, where you stayed, what you ate. So obviously it's about traceability, right? And traceability happens indistinctly in the private sector or the public sector when you actually generate transactional data.
Actually, I think that's a really good analogy you use there, like with the credit card, because if, let's just say that $10,000 is it's a business trip, right? If you paid everything by cash, you would then have to fill out an expense form and put all the information, all the justification. Whereas if you download your bank statement, all the information is there to click of a button. So you're trading that extra information, the sharing of that information for ease of use, because actually you're using the data in a better way. And I think that's almost exactly the same thing that we're doing with e-invoicing and other areas, or should be, because what you're doing is ultimately making it easier for the taxpayer to be able to submit their taxes and pay their taxes, which if everybody should be doing anyway, right? You shouldn't really need to be hiding anything.
And this, again, is traceability. You said you spent all this. We know you did. That's what the Australians, the ATO does. Yeah. The ATO, Andrew, they just, I think it's a 10-page form, tax form. They send you, and they say, look, this is all the information that we have. This is all your earnings. This is all your expenditures. This is what you owe. If you don't agree, then obviously we can send you a more comprehensive audit. But if you do, then just sign here and just pay, and that's the end of it. Because you have traceability on the majority of the things that are taking place. So it's just a matter of corroborating, if you want, what they already know, because of the transactions that you made on the purchasing or on the credit card, or on any other type of transaction that you're able to follow.
Yeah, I think there's several governments now, or tax authorities now, that are saying it's not a case of us to have to prove to you that your tax is wrong. You have to prove to us that our tax is wrong. As in, like I said, there's the bill, there's the information. Because, and I think that actually has two major advantages. One, it means there's less time that the tax authorities have to do in terms of trying to find information. They do their job, and if no one complains, there's no other work to be done, right? Whereas if it's the other way around, you'd still have to be trying to look to see if everybody's tax returns are correct. But the other thing then is that you're then encouraging or forcing the taxpayers, and in my world it's more the companies that have to pay the tax rather than individuals, to actually make sure their systems are correct and actually put more of an effort into creating that digital link to make sure that the quality of the data that flows through can be traceable. Because if the tax authority says one number and you have a different, that's a huge amount of work to then be able, because you can't just go, all right, fine, we'll sign it and carry on with a different number, because every year it's going to be different. And eventually you're going to have to explain that to a tax authority or to your CFO or to your shareholders.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. And then if you have any tax incentives as part of the business that you run, then obviously the tax administration will know about it and they will deduct those. If you have certain exemptions, if you have any reduced rates, fine. Those should also be incorporated. But in the end, again, that's why I was saying in the future, it would not be different from a public company where they send you the invoice.
What do you think the biggest challenges facing tax professionals are facing, and also tax authorities are facing?
Again, bureaucracy, red tape, and convoluted processes. Some of them are redundant processes, complex systems. But then, more broadly, I think one of the things that we are constantly suffering from is human resources, talented human resources, because we need a different profile for certain types of endeavors, for certain types of tasks. Forensics analytics, right? You don't see much of those, or many of those in tax administration, right? Data analysts, data scientists, programmers. These are people that are needed in tax administration, but it's hard to get. So the process of digitalization starts with the right amount of people in tax administration as well. So that's a big challenge.
What would you think is a common mistake that you see tax authorities make?
The common mistake they make is again, sometimes I would say that underestimating sometimes the amount of the problem or the gap that is widening because they don't take solutions, or they don't take the right approach. Delaying things, for example, thinking that this is just a temporary problem, or not planning or understanding the implementation phase in full. I think those are the most common mistakes: underestimating, and then thinking that the problem is easier to solve than what it is. But the worst part is delaying things just because they don't think it's the right time.
Gerardo, thank you so much for your time. It's been really fascinating. I look forward to the next time we meet, and the new stories that you'll be able to bring. But until that time, thank you so much, and speak soon.